Good. Welcome to our webinar, How to Manage Demand in These Uncertain Times. Short agenda. I will give a small introduction in general on what we see is the impact of Corona on the S&OP process and our S&OP framework. And basically then Lorenz will take over. He will introduce our demand planning framework, which is our general framework we use, let us say, also in normal times. He will try to highlight if this is our demand planning framework, what are the COVID aspects we see at customers today. And then he will try to give two specific examples of what are options for you to do in these special times. That's our agenda we have foreseen. Well, I don't need to introduce the subject. I think all of you have seen the news, are personally affected, potentially working from home. Different companies are experiencing different challenges, but in general, all of us are currently affected by Corona. This is our general S&OP framework. So for people who wouldn't know us, we are Solventure. We are experts in implementing sales and operations planning in companies, and the different steps of the S&OP approach are shown here. And I just want to pick on the different processes, a couple of highlights of what we see going on today, and then of course Lorenz will go into more detail when it comes to demand. I'll start with segmentation, which is customer product segmentation. I think in general, we see companies are affected in one of two ways today. Some companies really see an explosion of the demand. If today you are making pasta or any type of food which can be stored over a longer period of time, people have been hoarding, so chances are real that you have seen a significant uplift in the demand, most probably up to a point that you are unable to satisfy all the demand that you currently have. For those companies, segmenting customers and segmenting products might be important. If you are unable to meet the demand, the question is, how are we going to cut? What are customers and what are customer segmentations, and also what are products and what are product segmentations. This might also be the moment to grab market share, so making good tactical decisions is important there. And if you don't have a proper segmentation, basically you leave the decision up to the operational planners or even order management. That's not necessarily something you want to do. So try to think about segmentation. If you have questions there, it's certainly something we can help you with also in these special times. So some companies really see an uplift in the demand. Other companies see a reduced demand because most probably their customers are shutting down. So if you are a supplier to the automotive, then a lot of the automotive is, let's say, has lowered production or has completely shut down. So most probably then you will also see your demand negatively impacted. So then at this point, segmentation might be less of an issue for you. But again, when we see a rebound in the market, if you would have shortages, that's especially the time when having a good segmentation helps to put priorities. I'll skip the product management, jump into demand planning. Well, whether you are on the positive side of the crisis or on the negative side of the crisis, I believe any company today has the challenge that on the short term, we need to assess what Corona will do to our demand. It could either go up or it could either go down. Most probably we will then reach a certain plateau. And then the question is, when will we get out of this Corona effect? So steering into Corona, then reaching a certain plateau and then steering out of Corona, I think that's the key challenge that many companies are facing today. So if you today see an explosion of the demand, the question is, at what point will we reach a certain plateau? And okay, after the corona, we can expect the demand will drop, and even the demand could drop to a lower level compared to before corona. Why? It's almost like a promotion. You get a kind of a cannibalization effect afterwards. If people and customers have been hoarding your products, it might get into a dip, your demand, after the corona period. On the other situation, if you're on the bad side of the crisis, so to speak, yeah, your demand will be dropping now or has dropped already. You will reach a plateau, and you need to make sure that you start a pickup of the demand sufficiently early, because if you don't see the pickup of the demand coming, then basically you will be out of product at the crucial period that your customers are restarting, and you don't want to miss any sales at the moment that demand is picking back up again. Yeah? And for global companies, it goes into different waves. So first of all, we had China, then we now more or less have Europe. Everybody sees that the US is coming next, and after the US, we could still have Latin America and Africa. So certainly also for global companies, forecasting those different corona waves, steering in, reaching a plateau and steering out, that's a key challenge for all of the companies when it comes to demand planning. Inventory, so again, two options. It could be that you are short of inventory. If you're on the good side of the crisis, you will be out of inventory. If you're out of inventory, make sure that you have a good segmentation to make priorities and to make choices. If you're on the bad side of the crisis, if you don't have enough demand, customers start delaying orders or customers start canceling orders, then chances are real that your inventories are increasing. If your inventories are increasing, it's consuming cash. And certainly if your demand is low, instead of having more cash going into the inventory, you want to free up cash and you want to free up working capital. So then we get into the inventory piece. Here again, if you want to lower inventories and you want to look for clever ways to lower inventories, that's also something which we can help you with. We are supporting some of our customers in those type of analysis today. Supply planning. Again, some companies don't have enough capacity, or some companies might be short on key raw materials. If you are short on key raw materials, making intelligent decisions in the supply planning to say, okay, with the limited amount of raw materials or intermediates I have available, what are now the best possible production plans, trying to maximize either sales volume, either margins, or either attainment of a certain percentage of demand in different regional or different product markets. Those are key decisions in supply planning today. If you're on the bad side of the crisis, then most probably you are shutting down your plants, or you might be forced to shut down plants because of governmental regulations. Well, in any case, if you need to gradually shut down plants, or you are forced to shut down a plant and need to look at how to cover that demand in a different plan, that of course are all key supply planning decisions, which are key to the S&OP process, and where either customers are already using Arqiva as a tool and the existing process to run that, or where we can also provide temporary solutions and temporary help. And then in the middle here is our triangle. So we say, okay, on the long term, we also explained it in our previous webinar. In the long term, you want to focus on value, and we measure value as a return on capital employed, or bang for the buck. And in a normal situation, that's what you would want to do. So what are the margins we generate? What is the invested capital, and how do we optimize that? Today, in most companies, the triangle is out of balance. If you are on the good side of the crisis, meaning that your demand is going through the roof, then you can be sure that there is a lot of pressure on delivering service, on delivering the sales, on delivering the top line. I always say that any decision is good as long as it's a conscious decision, and as long as it's a well thought through decision. So if you are on the good side of the crisis, try to discuss with your management, okay, what are the costs we are willing to make to really get the sale done? And what are the investments we are willing to do in strategic raw materials to make sure that we don't starve the supply chain and that we will be able to keep on producing. So yes, we want to go for the service and for the top line, but what are the investments we are willing to do from a cost perspective and from an inventory perspective? If you are on the bad side of the crisis, so your customers stop ordering, delay orders, or simply shut the factories, yeah, then you know that your sales will get a significant hit. If your sales gets a significant hit, there will be a huge cost pressure within your company, and you will want to save on working capital. Instead of seeing inventories increasing, you want to lower the inventory. I want to lower the inventory because I still need to pay my people, I still need to pay my suppliers. So for those companies, the impact will really here be on the cost and on the cash side. And there to try to have a good, thoughtful discussion on how deep will we go and how deep will we go on the inventory, because if we don't keep certain strategic stocks at the moment that the demand picks back up, we might be simply too late to then react to the recovery of the demand, and we could have huge service issues there and lost sales at that point in time. So any decision in that triangle is good, as long as it's a conscious decision and the decision has been evaluated on the three corners of that triangle. I think that's a piece of advice we would give, and that's the type of discussion we currently see and would expect to see in that executive SNOP meeting. Yeah. And okay, this is maybe a somewhat broader introduction linked to SNOP in general, but I think this is what we see going on at our customers today. Customers that have invested in good SNOP processes and SNOP tooling, we believe today are better equipped to deal with this situation, because what you simply need to do is to speed up the cycle. Instead of having a monthly or a quarterly SNOP, you now want to have a weekly SNOP. If you need to have a weekly SNOP and you don't have a decent process and a decent tool in place, it's never going to work. We also believe it's in that sense a moment of truth for SNOP as a process. And I know there is quite some customers in the conference, so yeah, good choice from your side. If there's people who would like to continue this discussion on SNOP with us offline, that's of course possible. And before handing over to Lawrence, yeah, so we already intensely work with our customers in normal situations, but now we also try to see how can we help. So can we help you in building those Corona demand scenarios, steering into the crisis? What are different scenarios for bottoming out? What would be different scenarios for lifting back up? Lawrence will discuss that. It says the impact on the inventory and the supply. So some companies ask us, like, okay, we need to save on inventory. How can we do it in a clever way? You might be faced with people being ill or people being home with family leave. Here too, we can help you with interim solutions. We can help you with online training through our academy. And basically, we even build a web page to just keep the information centralized on what are extra things we are doing for our customers today. So Lawrence, that was the introduction from my side. So I'll make you presenter.
Perfect.
Yes,
can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it. Perfect.
All right, perfect. So first of all, hi everyone. So as Bram explains, I will first discuss our standard demand planning framework and the implications of the COVID-19 virus on it. And then I will continue with two case studies we did at customers. So first, the framework. So high level, what do we think are the key elements to win the forecasting game? Is actually get as much information as possible. And we gathered them in three categories: internal, external, and human. So what do we mean by this? So actually, if we look at the internal information, this is about your sales history, for example, which we can use to create statistical forecasts. But as you might have mentioned, during these periods, statistical forecasts alone will definitely not do the job. So that's why it's important to also include external indicators. For example, customer sentiment at the moment, the number of COVID-19 cases, GBP growth might be very relevant now to make sure you get a decent forecast. And third, most important part maybe, is the collaborative effort of the team. So we still need to know if you're going to launch a new product, is that launch still going to happen, same date? Are there going to be phase-out products? Is there a customer forecast we can use, or do salespeople know about certain promotions? So these three elements make sure you can have a good forecast, not only on the operational but also tactical and strategic level. So I'll now go into a bit more detail on the framework. So as you can see here, we have 4 main pillars. And if we start from left to right, I'll just discuss them and also the impact of the coronavirus on them. So if we start on the left, we first have our demand analysis. And basically this part is about understanding your history and making some analysis before you start forecasting. So as Bram already mentioned, segmenting the portfolio is key. So for example, the classical segmentation is about the Pareto analysis, like ABC, and variability analysis. But at the moment, it might also be relevant to have kind of a COVID-19 analysis. For example, identify the products that have a high risk of supply shortages, or identify the products in which demand will be severely impacted. This might help you to create focus as well. Next to this, what I already mentioned about the life cycle, still important to know. For example, for a new product introduction, is the launch date still the launch date we predicted or we planned for? So this is the first part. The second part is about creating that baseline forecast. As already mentioned, a statistical forecast just based on your sales history will not do the job at the moment. So it's very important to maximize the intelligence. So make sure you have either macroeconomic indicators or you have some business intelligence applied to your forecast. Actually, this brings us to the third pillar, is the collaboration process. So we can have a baseline forecast, but in these kinds of situations, it's very important to have people enriching the forecast. For example, salespeople, for example, customers, reach out to your customers and ask about their order pattern if that changed. Also extremely important now is creating scenarios, and not only scenarios for the short term, but also scenarios on the long term. So we'll discuss a case in a few minutes about a customer asking, could you help with creating scenarios on a high level to know how long the demand hits will take and when will we have the uplift again. Okay, so that's the third pillar. And actually the last one is about performance management. So that's about forecast accuracy, about the forecast value add reports. Here it's very important to also estimate the cost of over forecasting and the cost of under forecasting. Also, if for example, you now do your forecast accuracy reports month per month, might also make sense to consider doing forecast accuracy on like a 3-month basis, because a month over month, it will be very difficult to have a good forecast accuracy at the moment. All right. Actually, this brings us to a question to you. So we're actually interested to see in which part of this framework you currently put most of your efforts. So as you can see now, there is a poll available, and I'll give you a minute to fill this in. Thanks.
Yep.
Right, so 56% is spending their time in the collaborative demand planning, which makes sense. And it's pretty funny to see only 2% is now about performance management. Okay, nice. So if you have any follow-up questions on this one, I suggest to use a chat box and I will come back to it during the Q&A session. All right, moving forward. Just one final slide before I go into the cases. Actually, this is saying by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So I heard some people saying it doesn't really make sense to make forecasts at the moment because we can't predict it at all. But it's very, very, very important to have some scenarios to know at least what you should do in each scenario. So this brings us to our first case. And actually, this was a customer asking for those high-level scenarios. So the question was, can you help us make those high-level scenarios? And how did we do this? So actually, we had 2 phases. And the first phase existed of 3 steps. First step was about mapping previous recessions. So for example, the 2008 financial crisis, mapping those recessions on your sales history and seeing, okay, what was the effect on your demand during these recessions? Once we completed this step, we can actually see during each recession, what was the year-over-year growth increase. For example, if you produce toilet paper, or decrease. Okay. And actually, the last step was creating scenarios based on these results. And those scenarios were, for example, what if that demand shock takes 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months? Another one would be, what's the difference if the demand shock is U-shaped, L-shaped, or V-shaped? For example, that L-shaped is what we're currently seeing at automotive customers. So yeah, these scenarios were made. Actually, I will just now discuss some more concrete example of the first 2 steps. So here you can see the first step with it, and you see the blue bars is actually chemical sales volume, which we got from the American Chemistry Council. Now we can see here the gray boxes are recessions in the past. So I'll take the example of the 2008 financial crisis, and we see here quite a steep decline in sales. Okay, so we did this for a few recessions we saw in the past 30 years. And then actually we can see during that recession, what was the impact on our sales. So in the second step, we can create these profiles. So for example, this first profile is the effect on your sales during the 2008 financial crisis, and we can see it's a steep decrease, so minus 25% to 30% for the first 6 months. And after month 6, we can see it's going up again. In another type of event, we can see it's going down very steep, but going up very fast as well. So these are 2 kinds of profiles we got out of this analysis. And this is quite interesting to make scenarios like, what would happen if during Corona we'll have this kind of pattern? So it will take more or less 12 months or 13 months, with the first 6 months being like a steep decline, and starting from month 6, it's going up again. Or what would be the difference if it goes down very steep, it goes up very fast as well? So these were 2 kind of scenarios we made. For most customers, we made 4 or 5. And of course, the next question is, okay, I've made those scenarios, but which scenario is most likely to happen now? So this is what we did in our phase 2. And this one here, we use leading indicators to determine the most likely crisis scenario. So what we do, we actually mapped leading indicators. For example, that's GDP growth, the consumer sentiment, And we checked those indicators during previous recessions. And we checked the values of those indicators now. So in February and in March, for example, in China, you could see the impact on those indicators. And using those values, we can make some estimations on which scenario is the most likely one to be. Okay, so this was the first case. So having high-level scenarios and also determining which scenario is most likely to happen. The second case is actually looking at more short-term demand signals. So first case was actually high level, making scenarios per country, for example. And here we're actually looking at short-term demand signals. And what did we do here? We actually have 4 steps now. So monitor, scenarios, assessing the impact, and acting. And the first one is about, okay, if I look at my current sales orders, and I look at my forecast, what percentage is actually covered? And do I see big differences in order patterns? For example, if a customer always orders in the first week of the month, is this still the case? Next thing we did is again making those scenarios, but more specific. So a scenario for a certain product line in a certain region. So it's more detailed. And the third part is assessing the impact. So for example, visualizing the effects on the projected inventory and also understanding the cost of overreacting and underreacting, which we already explained. The last step was actually, okay, using those scenarios, we have to review production plan, capacity plan, transfer plan. And also we can review, for example, a promotion plan or pricing strategy as a part of demand shaping. And lastly, like Bram already explained as well, is typically our customers have monthly S&OP cycles, IBP processes. It's now turned into a weekly written to make sure we can act in a fast way. I'll show you 2 examples, one of the monitor phase, one of the acting phase. So actually about the monitor phase, so you can see here, we have the blue line is being our forecast. We have our shipments and we have our open orders. And actually, we want to see the gap. So we want to see here, how close are we? And for example, I think for most of you, probably the gap is bigger than you want. And based on these analysis, so more and more detail. So for example, per product line, you can make some scenarios. About the acting phase, so if you're, for example, a toilet manufacturer, your order projection might be bigger than your current forecast. What you can do is pooling or substitution. So example from my daily life. Last week I went to the supermarket. They were out of toilet paper, but actually the kitchen paper was also empty. So they might have gone for that substitution strategy. The other one is if your order projection is smaller than your current forecast, it might be interesting for pooling or reallocation. So for example, if for a certain product line in Italy, you can see that your orders won't reach your forecast. You might think about reallocating products to, for example, Sweden, if there the order projection is close to the current forecast. All right, this brings us to the conclusion and the Q&A part. So as a conclusion, we actually have 6 steps to better prepare for a black swan event. And the first one is about segmenting for local and global effects. So actually what we see in the case studies, we both had scenarios on that high level, that global level, but also on that local level. Second step is evaluating each market segment. So you can see which indicator makes sense for which market segments. Third step is about quantifying the effects of COVID-19 on demand. So for example, using that first case study, you can make some analysis on a high level and create some scenarios on that high level. Step 4 would be to monitor order behavior from clients more closely. So are order patterns changing, yes or no? Making scenarios about those. Step 5 is, I think I explained it a few times already, but the cost of overreacting and underreacting is really, really important. And understanding and calculating those is key. The last step in the process, which I think might be the most relevant one, is demonstrating the added value of the S&OP process. So as we mentioned, more companies are going to weekly S&OP processes. It's very important to have clear decisions on what to discuss monthly and what to discuss weekly or even daily. And if you go for more regular meetings, also make sure that information flows to all of those stakeholders before you have the meeting, to make sure you can go to decisions during the meeting. Okay, so we'll open up for Q&A. Bram, can you guide us?
Yeah, you can just leave the slide there, Lawrence. That's perfect. So
yep.
In your GoToWebinar box, you have an option to post questions. There are already some questions coming in. So first question here is, if we see an increase in the demand, how do we know whether it's not just a bullwhip effect or whether it's really extra consumption? That's the question.
Okay, yeah. So what I saw at customer is actually, most importantly, is to ask your customer basically. So if you understand your customer behavior, your customer patterns, by asking or reaching out to your salespeople, you get that information. You can't really use, you can't just analyze your data. You need to reach out and ask.
Yeah, and I believe what can be done on the analytics side is, again, are you in a business that is typically susceptible to hoarding, right? And here again, it's never one-on-one because every black swan event is different, but at the same time also use your data to look in the past, and also look in the past like, how did a crisis profile look like? And maybe I saw an increase, and then after the crisis I saw a drop which was lower than the pre-crisis levels, basically like you would analyze promotion. So talk to your customers and analyze your data, and the combination of the two is probably what will lead you to the best insight. Another question here, and please keep putting your questions in the question box. What about consumers going towards more retailer brands versus A brands? Is this something other companies also see, to your knowledge, experience? So people might feel free to also react to that in the chat box or in the question box. In any case, from my side, we have some private label customers, and certainly in previous crises like the financial crisis, I did notice that for private label players, it was good business, in the sense that customers tried to buy cheaper. So they tried to buy the private label brands instead of the A brands. And at the same time, raw material prices are lower. Also, if you look at the current oil price is low. So if oil is then a key ingredient, certainly in the past I've seen good times for private label players. Not sure if somebody else in the audience would like to react to that. Would you like to add something to that, Lawrence?
No, that's what I was going to say. So,
yep. Another question here: besides the uncertainty of the demand, we are also struggling to get consensus on the demand after the crisis. There are two camps. One says never waste a crisis and believes we will come out stronger. And a second camp says let's de-risk and buffer cash for the period where demand returns back to normal. Any recommendations on how to reach consensus? Well, at least from my side, it triggers what I introduced in the beginning with that supply chain triangle. So you need to have that discussion and you need to think it through, and nobody has a crystal ball. So I think nobody knows how long this will really takes. Nobody knows what will be the recovery pattern. That's nobody has that crystal ball. And then it also triggers with me, Lawrence, what you said, like what would be the cost or what would be the risk if I over or understock? So if I really underestimate the forecast and I don't have enough inventory at the moment, the market picks back up. Do I risk losing a lot of market share? Or if I say, well, no, actually, I will be the only one who is able to supply a certain quality of certain raw materials or certain materials. So maybe depending also on how vulnerable you are, the cost of over and under forecasting or over and under stocking would be different. So I think that would be our tips. Any things to add from your side, Lawrence?
When I think about that over and under forecasting or reacting costs, I saw some pretty nice templates on the internet and so you don't have to start from scratch. It's actually available, so just as a tip.
Okay, so reach out to Lawrence if you want to know more. It sounds a bit mysterious. Keep the questions coming. Another question here. I think that refers back to that private label example. If private label is now grabbing more market share, will that last? Will that market share sustain? Well, again, try to analyze the past as a prediction for the future. Nobody has a crystal ball, but at least we can look at what historical crises have done. My expectation would be that I think in general, private label is gaining market share over branded products. I think in many markets that's a general trend. So again, more analysis would need to be done. But I would expect that if the general trend is already that people buy more private label and that retailers sell more private label, then it's likely that at the same time this will accelerate that effect. And that's if you don't have the data on your servers, then of course it's difficult. And we try to I don't think there is a lot of public data available to base the analysis on. Typically, we do start from company-specific data. Maybe a last question. There is one question here. I think with respect to the S&OP framework, does it change when we go from monthly to weekly S&OP? Lawrence, that refers a bit to what you told in the end. Maybe you can come back to that argument.
Yeah, sure. So it doesn't really make sense to have monthly S&OP meetings and weekly S&OP meetings that go about the same things. So it's very important to decide what you will discuss during your monthly meetings or once a month, and what you will discuss during your weekly touch bases. So it's important to know what to discuss when.
Same here. Somebody says we do have SNOE on a weekly basis and S&OP monthly, and daily connects for the firefighting. Yeah. Good. So we will close the webinar here. When we close the webinar, you will get a short poll. We are happy to take your comments. So what we try to do is use our S&OP framework to sketch a bit more broadly what we see in companies and how that affects the different aspects of S&OP. That's also why we believe it's the moment of truth for S&OP. Lorenz introduced our demand planning framework, and he also tried to highlight on how that standard framework looks like in COVID-19 times. And then we tried to give two examples, one which is a bit more tactical, like how do you try to define Corona demand profiles based on historical crises, and how do we use macroeconomic information to guide us into one of those scenario directions. And then some more shorter term demand sensing techniques, which help us to understand how big is the gap between the realization and the forecast, so that we can adjust the plans on a shorter term basis. That's more that weekly or that S&OE type of process. Those are the things we try to share with you. Don't hesitate to reach out to us in this context or in the broader context of S&OP or Corona Help. We're most looking forward to the interaction. So stay tuned. Let's at least stay in touch with each other, exchange experiences, what we see insightful, to get your comments and see what you see, learn together, and then we hope indeed to then see you back in our next webinar. So thank you all, and see you back soon. And thank you, Lawrence, for the intense preparation you made.
No problem. Thank
Bye.
you all.